few minutes ago, I entered one of the last remaining intact California ranchos from the Mexican period. A place called Rancho Santa Margarita y Las Flores. You probably know it better as Camp Pendleton. And I thought I would drive across Camp Pendleton today to give a sense of the scale of rancho life and the Mexican ranches, the land grant ranches that were established in the Mexican period in the 1830s and 1840s in California. And also to look at these places as the context for Californio life in Mexican California and as the setting and the dominant institution for economic, social, and political life in Mexican California. Rancho Santa Margarita y Las Flores was a land grant given by Governor Alvarado in 1841 and 1844 to the Pico brothers, Andres y Pio. And it was given in two parts. Grants of 89,000 acres and a grant of almost 40,000 acres for a grand total of 133,000 acres in San Diego County. And this ranch was added to land holdings that the Picos gained from the Mexican government of California to the north, Rancho Trabuco and Rancho Viejo, which became the basis for San Clemente and Mission Viejo and other communities in Orange County today. But we can get a feeling for the scale and the size and the grandeur of these Mexican ranches by traversing Camp Pendleton today. I'm traveling about 70 miles an hour, and I'll be talking, and we'll see just how far I get in a modern automobile traversing this ranch. During the Mexican period, about 700 land grants were given out to Mexican citizens and settlers in California. And this was land that had been originally held largely by the Franciscan missions and the missionaries. But beginning in 1833, with the secularization order by the Mexican government in Mexico City, California officials began promptly to begin granting out enormous acreages of land to see these lands developed, to follow their liberalizing pretensions and goals, to see California develop more in a more economically progressive way, to overcome some of the obstacles of the Franciscan order to that development, and also, of course, to put their own hands on this tantalizing possibility and opportunity locked in the landscape of these ranches. Rancho Santa Margarita y Las Flores was first settled by missionaries from Mission San Luis Rey as an estancia, the Las Flores estancia, which we'll pass here in a few minutes. It's right up the hill from Las Pulgas Road, exit on Camp Pendleton. And there they began running sheep and cattle to support the mission work itself. But with the granting of the land to the Pico brothers, they built a large adobe house there, which is the foundations for the adobe that still stands there, and made it a center for their life on the ranch here, at least when they visited this particular ranch. The ranches themselves provided for an abundant and luxurious life for those handful of California families who were able to gain control over them, but they also represented the basis for an extraordinary oligarchy, an exceptionally hierarchical society with a handful of very powerful landowners who controlled most of the lands along coastal California, and who dominated over and sometimes did not even pay the labor of the California Indian labor force that continued to be the bulk of the population and provide for most of the labor on these ranches. The ranchos themselves were the principal setting for California life, for the economy, for family, for political life in Mexican California, and they provided the basis for vast holdings of cattle and sheep, which were traded into a global market and connected California to a global economy, an increasingly globalized economy in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s. The Pico family themselves illustrate a variety of features that were pretty commonplace across California in the Mexican period. Their grandparents came to California from Mexico in 1776 with the ANSA expedition, walking from Sonora to San Francisco. Their father was a soldier in the Spanish Presidio system, and he had postings around the state, including in Los Angeles, where the Picos were born, and in San Diego, where Pio Pico grew up. Like many California families, the Picos were mestizos. They were of mixed Indian and European and African descent, which was common across Mexico in the 18th century. And they were people who were looking for an opportunity in the north for people like themselves to make a better place in the world on the new frontier of New Spain. The Pico brothers themselves were California born, and they were proud of the land of their birth, and they advocated fervently for its independence from Spain, and also for the independence of the lands and people held by the mission system. And they saw the secularization of the mission system as part of the liberalizing project of the era, which included the revolutions in the United States and the independence movements in Latin America, including the independence of Mexico. But when the moment of secularization came in the 1830s, most California families couldn't help themselves. And they reached out and snatched the opportunity to take control over these vast holdings of land and the Indian people who lived on those lands and the inexpensive labor that they offered. And so the Pico family story also points us to the conclusion that this transition from Spanish colonial rule to Mexican rule in California at a social and economic and political level also represented a transition from one minority-controlled authoritarian form of government and labor to another, from a Franciscan mission system to a land grant rancho system, in which a small number of Californians controlled the large majority share of the resources of the territory, and the majority of the people, still Native Americans, remained at the bottom of the society, performing labor for which they were poorly compensated and dispossessed of the land on which they themselves had been born as well. There's a lot more to say about the land grant ranchos in the Mexican period, and we'll find time to say some of it as we go. But for now, the legacies of this history are clear in California today, from the names on our streets and public schools and public parks, to the shape of our subdivisions and municipalities, to institutions like Camp Pendleton, but also to the unequal system of wealth and landholding in California, which in many fields like real estate development and resource extraction and agriculture, even today, find roots into this process of secularization of the missions and the granting of vast tracts of California land to just a handful of people in the early 19th century. You have to be careful where you step in California for what you may find if you look back into history, and that's a legacy that all of us bear. But for now, it's something to think about the next time you cross Camp Pendleton, the Rancho Santa Margarita y Las Flores in northern San Diego County.